When Jacob met his ex-wife and parents in a small cafe in Austin, his life was turned upside down again. After years of divorce, loneliness, and hard work, he had finally found success and inner peace. But now they're back, with their apologies, regrets, and secret agendas. Will Jacob be able to? Jacob had always believed that the past was behind him. 5 years of rebuilding his life, 5 years of hard work, and 5 years of proving to himself that he was enough. His small coffee shop in Austin had grown into a thriving business, a testament to his resilience and determination. But all it took was one unexpected encounter to bring the past rushing back, like a storm he thought he had outrun. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and Jacob was at the local market picking up supplies for his cafe. The air was filled with the scent of fresh produce and baked goods, and the bustling crowd gave him a sense of anonymity. He liked it that way, being just another face in the crowd, free from the weight of expectations and judgments. As he reached for a bag of coffee beans, he heard a voice that made his blood run cold. "Jacob, is it you?" He froze, his hand hovering midair. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was soft, hesitant, and carried a hint of nostalgia that he hadn't heard in years. Slowly, he turned around, and there she was, Emily, his ex-wife, standing just a few feet away, her eyes wide with surprise, her lips parted as if she wasn't sure whether to smile or retreat. Behind her stood his parents, their expressions a mix of shock and something else he couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? Or maybe just discomfort? For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jacob's mind raced, trying to process the scene before him. What were they doing here? Why now? He hadn't seen or spoken to any of them in years. Not since the divorce, not since he had cut them out of his life completely. And yet, here they were, standing in front of him as if no time had passed at all. "Jacob," his mother said, breaking the silence. Her voice was warm, almost too warm, as if she was trying to bridge the gap between them with a single word. "It's been so long. You look well." He didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat felt tight, his chest heavy with emotions he had buried long ago. Anger, frustration, sadness, and a strange, unsettling satisfaction all swirled inside him, threatening to spill over. He clenched his fists, trying to steady himself, but the memories came flooding back, unbidden and relentless. Jacob had grown up in a household where success was not just a goal, it was an expectation. His father, a prominent lawyer, and his mother, a successful businesswoman, had always made it clear what they wanted for him: a prestigious education, a high-powered career, and a picture-perfect family. Anything less was unacceptable. But Jacob had never felt like he measured up. No matter how hard he tried, it was never enough. He remembered the countless dinners where his father would grill him about his grades, his future plans, his ambitions. "You need to aim higher, Jacob," his father would say, his voice tinged with disappointment. "You can't just settle for mediocrity." Even when Jacob graduated with a degree in business administration from a decent university, it wasn't enough. His parents had wanted him to attend an Ivy League school, to land a job at a top-tier corporation. Instead, he chose a management position at a small local business in Dallas. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a sense of balance, something his parents had never understood. When he met Emily, he thought he had finally found someone who understood him. She was vibrant, charismatic, and full of life. She admired his authenticity, his willingness to forge his own path. For a while, it felt like they were a team, united against the world. But that changed after they got married. At first, Emily had been supportive of Jacob's choices. She loved that he prioritized his well-being over societal expectations. But as she became more involved with his family, things began to shift. His parents' constant criticism of his career started to seep into her thoughts. What had once been admiration turned into doubt, and doubt turned into resentment. "Do you really think this is enough?" she would ask him, her voice tinged with frustration. "Don't you want more for us? For our future?" Jacob tried to explain that he was happy with his life, that he didn't want to sacrifice his mental health chasing someone else's idea of success. But his words fell on deaf ears. Emily had started to believe his parents' narrative, that he was wasting his potential, that he was holding her back. The breaking point came one night after a dinner at his parents' house. Throughout the evening, his parents had made subtle jabs about his career, questioning his choices and insinuating that he wasn't living up to his potential. On the drive home, Emily was silent, but Jacob could feel the tension building. When they got home, she exploded. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I thought I married someone who had ambition, someone who wanted to build a future. But you're content with just existing. I can't be with someone like that." Her words cut deeper than anything his parents had ever said. In that moment, Jacob felt like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a person. He tried to salvage their relationship, but it was like trying to hold on to sand. The harder he gripped, the faster it slipped through his fingers. When Emily asked for a divorce, Jacob was devastated. But what hurt even more was discovering that his parents had played a role in her decision. He learned from mutual friends that they had been encouraging her to leave him, to find someone who could give her the life she deserved. To them, Jacob was a disappointment, and they didn't hesitate to use his marriage as a tool to prove it. During the divorce process, his parents were surprisingly kind to Emily, something that surprised and hurt him deeply. His mother even offered to let her stay in the guest house while she rebuilt her life. "You're an incredible woman," his father had told Emily. "You deserve someone who can measure up to you." Those words, directed at the woman who was breaking up his marriage, made Jacob feel like a stranger in his own family. When the divorce was finalized, Jacob felt completely alone. His parents made it clear that they didn't support his decisions, and now he couldn't even count on the emotional support of the person he thought would be his partner forever. That's when he made the most difficult but necessary decision of his life: to cut off all contact with them. He packed up and moved to the outskirts of Austin, Texas, needing a fresh start far from everyone and everything that reminded him of that stage of his life. The first year after the divorce was hell. Jacob found himself trapped in a cycle of regret and self-recrimination. He wondered if he really was the problem, if maybe his family and Emily were right in thinking that he wasn't ambitious enough. But every time he started to doubt himself, he reminded himself of one thing: the happiness he felt when he worked at what he loved. That sense of purpose couldn't be measured by money or status. He knew that was the key to moving forward, even if it took him time to rebuild himself. During those dark months, Jacob found solace in something unexpected: his love for business. In Dallas, he had worked as a manager in a local company, and although it wasn't glamorous, he had learned a lot about how to run a successful business. He decided it was time to apply that knowledge to something of his own. With the savings he had left and a small loan, he opened a coffee shop in a residential area of Austin. The place was modest, but it had something special. It was his. At first, it was difficult. The days were long, and he often felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of managing every aspect of the business. But every small achievement, every satisfied customer, gave him a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. His business not only began to grow, but it also became a space where he could connect with the community. He started meeting people who valued what he did, and little by little, his confidence returned. Over time, the coffee shop grew so much that he decided to expand. He opened 2 more branches in different areas of Austin, and soon he found himself managing a whole team of employees. The best part was that he never compromised his values. His cafes were places where people could enjoy a warm atmosphere, where employees were treated with respect, and where success was not measured solely by profits, but by the positive impact they had on the community. 5 years after his divorce, Jacob's life was completely different. Not only had he built a successful business from scratch, but he had also found an inner peace that he had never experienced before. He had stopped worrying about his family's opinions and learned to define success on his own terms. However, none of that prepared him for the moment he came face to face with them. That day at the market, he was buying coffee when he heard a familiar voice. He turned around, and there they were, his parents and Emily. They were in line just a few feet away, and he couldn't help but freeze. His parents looked a little older, but just as impeccable as always. Emily, though still attractive, had a more tired expression, less self-assured. He stared at them for a few seconds until his mother saw him and smiled. "Look who's here," she said in an almost triumphant tone, as if it were an expected reunion. Jacob couldn't believe her attitude. After years of silence, of not hearing from them, now they were acting as if everything was fine. His father joined the conversation, saying something like, "It's good to see you after so long. It seems like you're doing well." Jacob just nodded without saying much, But that's when Emily chimed in. I heard you open a few coffee shops. I've seen some things on social media. It seems like you've done incredibly well. There is a mix of admiration and something else in her voice. Remorse? Envy? Jacob wasn't sure, but a part of him couldn't help but feel a kind of satisfaction at seeing them surprised by how his life had changed. He was standing there in front of them with a mix of emotions that he could barely handle. On the one hand, he wanted to stay calm, to show that nothing that had happened affected him. On the other hand, he felt a contained fury that had been building up for years. How dare they talk to him as if nothing had happened after everything they did to destroy his marriage and undermine his self-esteem? But instead of saying anything, he stood still, watching them as they tried to fill the awkward silence. His mother, always the first to speak, launched into her typical, superficial chatter. We knew you had potential. That's why we always tried to push you to aspire to more. The irony of those words made Jacob want to laugh. Push him, or rather, crush him until he doubted himself? But he didn't say anything. He let them keep talking because he wanted to understand what they were doing there and, above all, why they now seemed interested in him. Emily was the next to speak. I heard your coffee shops are quite popular. Congratulations. You've really achieved something great. There's a strange tone in her voice, a mix of kindness and something that sounded like regret. It was as if she was trying to build a bridge between them, but the truth was that bridge had been burned a long time ago. Thank you, Jacob replied, keeping his voice neutral. Yes, I've done well. I've worked hard to get here. And what else have you been doing? His father asked, trying to sound casual, but his tone had a hint of nervousness. He wasn't used to not having control in a conversation with Jacob. Throughout his life, his father had been the one who dictated how things should go, but this time was different. Now, Jacob was on his turf. Not much else, Jacob said, shrugging his shoulders. Working, living my life. And you? What are you doing around here? That question took them by surprise. His mother stammered something about visiting some friends in the area, but it didn't sound convincing. That's when Emily, clearly less comfortable with the exchange, blurted out what seemed to be the real reason they were there. Actually, I think we also wanted to see you. It's been years and, well, I think there are many things that were left unsaid. Her voice dropped towards the end of the sentence, as if she wasn't sure what she was trying to achieve. That was the moment Jacob finally felt like he had control. He looked at his mother, then his father, and finally Emily. He took a deep breath before speaking. It's funny to hear that, he said in a tone that couldn't hide the irony. Because I remember very clearly everything that was said the last time we saw each other. Or have you forgotten how you made me feel like a failure? Not only as a son, but also as a husband. The silence that followed was deafening. His mother avoided his gaze. His father seemed to be searching for words, and Emily simply looked at the floor. Finally, it was his father who broke the silence. Look, we don't want to relive the past. We all made mistakes, but the important thing is that now we want to rebuild things. We're family, after all. Those words almost made Jacob laugh. Family? Now they wanted to be his family? After years of ignoring him, criticizing him, allying with Emily to destroy his marriage, now they wanted reconciliation? I don't think that's possible, Jacob replied, his voice firmer than he expected. You made it clear what you thought of me. You not only abandoned me when I needed you most, but you helped my marriage fall apart. And now, after all this time, you think we can be family again as if nothing happened? His mother tried to interrupt, but Jacob raised a hand to stop her. No, Mom. No more excuses. All my life, you made me feel like I wasn't enough, and when I decided to go my own way, you not only turned your backs on me, but you made sure I had no one by my side. So no, we're not here to rebuild anything. I don't need that from you. Emily tried to intervene. We just want to talk, clear things up. Maybe we can start over. There's nothing to clear up, Jacob interrupted, feeling a surge of confidence. You cleared everything up when you chose to walk away from me, when you chose to believe that I wasn't enough. And believe me, that's something I will never forget. After that, he paused. He could feel his heart beating fast, but he stood firm. Everyone was silent, clearly shocked by his response. But instead of waiting for them to try to justify their actions, Jacob simply turned around and left. He walked towards the market exit without looking back, feeling a liberation he hadn't experienced in years. That encounter left him thinking. Although he felt satisfaction in defending himself, it also revived many buried emotions. As much as he wanted to ignore it, He knew this wouldn't be the end. If they had made the effort to look for him now, they would probably try to contact him again. After that counter at the market, Jacob's head was full of thoughts for days. He couldn't stop replaying every word he said to them and every expression he saw on their faces. There was a mix of relief and anger inside him. On the one hand, he had finally had the opportunity to tell them everything he had repressed for years. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the possibility that they would come looking for him again. Something in their eyes, especially Emily's, made him think they weren't going to give up so easily. And he wasn't wrong. Just a week later, he received a message on his phone from an unknown number. It was his mother, in a more conciliatory tone than ever. She told him that she and his father wanted to talk to him seriously. They said they understood his frustration, that they regretted the decisions they had made, and that they just wanted a chance to explain themselves. Jacob ignored the message. He thought that would be enough for them to understand that he wasn't interested in reopening that door. But he underestimated their insistence. The following days, the messages continued. Sometimes they were from his mother, sometimes from his father, and to his surprise, also from Emily. They all seemed to have a shared mission: to convince Jacob to talk. What surprised him was the tone of Emily's messages. Unlike his parents, who tried to sound formal and conciliatory, she seemed to be more emotional. She sent him long messages talking about how much she regretted how things had ended, that she still remembered the good times they had together, and that she wished they could fix things somehow. At first, Jacob didn't respond, but one particular message made him think. Emily wrote, "I know I made mistakes, but I need you to know that I always admired you, even when I didn't show it. What happened wasn't fair, and I know I was part of the problem. Please, just give me a chance to explain myself." That message bothered him more than he expected, not because of the words themselves, but because it seemed so timely, now that things were going well for him. For years, he hadn't heard from her, not a message, not a call, nothing. And now, when he had finally found success and stability, suddenly they wanted to explain themselves. Finally, tired of the constant messages, Jacob blocked all the numbers. He didn't want to fall into the temptation to respond, much less to open a door that he had closed with so much effort. But just when he thought the matter was over, something happened that put them back in his path. One Friday afternoon, while he was checking some orders at one of his coffee shops, one of his employees told him that there was someone outside who wanted to talk to him. He thought it would be a regular customer, so he went out front to see who it was. When he opened the door, his heart sank. There they were, his parents and Emily, standing together as if they were a perfectly synchronized team. "What are you doing here?" Jacob asked, unable to hide his irritation. "We just want to talk," said his mother, her tone softer than ever, but no less manipulative. "We know you're upset, and we understand, but we think you deserve to hear our side." "There's nothing to hear," Jacob replied quickly. "You made your point clear years ago. What more do you have to tell me?" Emily stepped forward. "Please, just a few minutes. If after that you still feel the same way, we'll leave and won't bother you again." Jacob didn't know what prompted him to accept. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe he just wanted to close. Jacob sat across from his parents and Emily at a small table outside his cafe, the tension palpable. His father cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We know we messed up," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "We thought we were doing what was best for you, but now we understand that we didn't give you the support you needed." Jacob clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He had heard these words before, empty apologies that always came with strings attached. His mother chimed in, her tone pleading. "We only wanted the best for you, Jacob. We never wanted you to feel inferior. But now we realize we didn't act in the best way." Emily, sitting between them, looked at Jacob with a mix of regret and longing. "I didn't know how to value you either," she admitted. "I let other people's comments influence how I saw you, and that was a mistake. Now I see everything you've achieved, and I realize how much I underestimated you." Jacob's chest tightened. Her words sounded sincere, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were too little, too late. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And what do you expect from me now?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. "Do you want me to just forget everything and go back to being one big, happy family? Because if that's what you're looking for, you're wasting your time." His parents exchanged uneasy glances, and his mother finally spoke. "We want to be a part of your life again. We know we were wrong, but now we see how far you've come. We believe we can fix this." Jacob's eyes narrowed. There it was, the truth behind their sudden interest. They weren't here out of remorse or guilt. They were here because his success had made him worthy of their attention. His success was their excuse to return, their way of justifying why it was now worth reconnecting. "I don't need you to fix anything," Jacob said firmly, standing up. "My life is better without you in it. So thank you for coming, but there's nothing more to discuss." Without waiting for their response, he turned and walked back into his cafe, closing the door behind him. He watched through the window as they sat in stunned silence before finally leaving. For the first time in years, Jacob felt a sense of control. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. His past had a way of creeping back into his life, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it at bay. The days following the confrontation with his parents and Emily were anything but peaceful for Jacob. Despite his firm stance, their presence lingered in his mind like a shadow he couldn't shake. He tried to focus on his work, on the bustling energy of his cafes, but the memories of their words kept resurfacing. The apology from his father, the regret in Emily's voice, and his mother's pleading tone. It all felt like a carefully rehearsed script, one designed to manipulate him into letting them back into his life. A week later, the first sign of their persistence came in the form of a letter. It arrived at his cafe, addressed to him in his mother's elegant handwriting. Jacob hesitated before opening it, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the paper. The letter was long, filled with apologies and promises of change. His mother wrote about how much they missed him, how proud they were of his success, and how they wanted to rebuild their relationship. She even mentioned that Emily had been struggling since their divorce and had expressed a desire to reconnect. Jacob set the letter aside, his mind racing. He didn't want to believe their words, but a small part of him wondered if they were sincere. Could people really change? Or was this just another attempt to control him, to mold him into the person they had always wanted him to be? The letters kept coming, sometimes from his mother, sometimes from his father, and once, to his surprise, from Emily. Her letter was different, more personal. She wrote about the regrets she carried, the mistakes she had made, and how she had come to realize how much she had underestimated him. "I always admired you, Jacob," she wrote, "even when I didn't show it. I let others influence me, and I lost sight of what really mattered. I hope one day you can forgive me." Jacob didn't respond. He told himself it was better to keep his distance, to protect the life he had built. But the letters stirred something inside him, a mix of anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope that he couldn't quite suppress. Then, one evening, as Jacob was closing up his main cafe, he saw her. Emily was standing outside, her hands shoved into her coat pockets, her breath visible in the cold night air. She looked smaller somehow, less confident than he remembered. When their eyes met, she gave him a tentative smile. "Jacob," she said softly as he stepped outside, "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to talk to you, just for a few minutes." Jacob crossed his arms, his guard up. "What do you want, Emily?" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I want to apologize, not just for the divorce, but for everything. For not standing by you, for letting your parents influence me, for not seeing how much you were worth. I was wrong, Jacob, and I've spent every day since regretting it." Jacob stared at her, his emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to believe her, to let go of the anger and pain that had been weighing him down for years. But another part of him, the part that had been hurt too many times, couldn't trust her words. "Emily," he said finally, his voice steady but cold, "I appreciate the apology, but it doesn't change anything. You made your choice, and I've moved on. I don't know what you're looking for, but I can't give it to you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand. I just needed you to know how sorry I am. And if you ever change your mind—" She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Jacob watched as she turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the night. He stood there for a long time, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full extent of his pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, the longing for the life he had lost. But as he locked up the cafe and walked to his car, he reminded himself of how far he had come. He had built a life for himself, one that was his own, free from the expectations and judgments of others. And no matter how much his past tried to pull him back, he was determined to keep moving forward. The next morning, Jacob woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He had made his decision. He wouldn't let his past define him anymore. But as he stepped into his cafe, ready to face the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. His family and Emily weren't going to give up so easily, and Jacob knew that the hardest part of his journey was still ahead. Jacob's resolve to keep his past at bay was tested sooner than he expected. A few days after Emily's visit, he received a call from one of his employees at his newest cafe location. "Jacob, you need to come down here," the voice on the other end said, urgency lacing every word. "There's a situation." When Jacob arrived, he found his parents standing in the middle of the cafe, their presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. His mother was speaking to a group of customers, her voice carrying across the space. "We're so proud of our son," she was saying, her tone dripping with false warmth. "He's built something truly remarkable here." Jacob's stomach churned. He marched over, his expression hard. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the chatter. His father turned to him, a smile plastered on his face. "We just want to see your success for ourselves, Jacob. It's impressive, really. You've done well." Jacob clenched his fists, his patience wearing thin. "I didn't ask for your approval, and I don't need it. You need to leave. Now." His mother's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Jacob, please. We're family. Can't we just talk? We've missed you." The customers were watching now, their curiosity piqued by the tension in the air. Jacob felt exposed, as if his carefully constructed world was unraveling right in front of him. "You lost a right to call yourselves my family a long time ago," he said, his voice rising. "Now get out before I call the police." His parents exchanged a look, their expressions a mix of shock and frustration. But they didn't argue. They turned and left, the door closing behind them with a soft chime. Jacob stood there for a moment, his heart pounding, before turning to his employees. "I'm sorry about that," he said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Let's get back to work." The rest of the day passed in a blur, but Jacob couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. His parents' visit felt like a warning, a reminder that they weren't going to let him go so easily. And then there was Emily. Her apology had stirred something in him, something he had tried to bury deep inside. He didn't want to admit it, but a part of him still cared about her, still wondered what could have been. That night, as Jacob sat alone in his apartment, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone. Pictures of him and Emily, smiling and happy, before everything fell apart. He stopped on one photo in particular, a candid shot of them at the beach, the sun setting behind them. They looked so young, so full of hope. Jacob's chest tightened, and he quickly shut off his phone, tossing it onto the couch. He couldn't let himself get pulled back into the past. He had worked too hard to build the life he had now, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't ignore the truth. His past wasn't done with him yet. The next morning, Jacob arrived at his cafe to find a note taped to the door. It was from Emily. "Jacob," it read, "I know you don't want to see me, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Please meet me at the park at noon. I'll be waiting." Jacob crumpled the note in his hand, his frustration boiling over. He didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear whatever she had to say. But a part of him couldn't ignore the urgency in her words. Against his better judgment, he decided to go. At noon, he found her sitting on a bench in the park, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as he approached, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Jacob crossed his arms, his expression guarded. "What do you want, Emily?" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant." The words hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, his mind racing. "What?" Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "It's yours, Jacob. I found out a few weeks ago. I didn't know how to tell you, but I couldn't keep it from you any longer." Jacob felt the ground shift beneath him. This changed everything. He sank onto the bench beside her, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, fear, confusion, they all battled for dominance. "Why now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me this now?" Emily wiped her tears, her hands shaking. "Because I want to do this right, Jacob. I want to give our child the life they deserve. And I can't do that without you." Jacob looked at her, his heart aching with the weight of her words. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to feel. But one thing was clear. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. And no matter how hard he tried to run from his past, it had finally caught up with him. Jacob sat in stunned silence, Emily's words echoing in his mind. Pregnant. His child. The weight of it all felt overwhelming, like a tidal wave crashing over him. He had spent years building a life free from the chaos of his past, and now, in an instant, everything had changed. Emily reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it on his arm. Jacob, I know this is a lot to process. I didn't plan for this to happen, but I want to do the right thing. For the baby, and for us. Jacob pulled away, standing up and pacing in front of the bench. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. How do I even know it's mine? He asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. We've been divorced for years, Emily. You can't just show up out of nowhere and drop this on me. Emily's face fell, but she didn't back down. I understand why you doubt me, Jacob, but I'm telling the truth. I haven't been with anyone else since we split. This baby is yours. And if you don't believe me, we can do a paternity test. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Jacob stopped pacing, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to be angry, to push her away and pretend this wasn't happening. But deep down, he knew she wasn't lying. The timing added up, and despite everything, he couldn't ignore the possibility that this child was his. Okay, he said finally, his voice quieter now. Let's say it's true. What do you want from me, Emily? What are you expecting? Emily stood up, her eyes pleading. I don't expect anything from you, Jacob. I just want you to be a part of this. I want our child to have a father who's present, who cares. I know we've been through a lot, but this isn't about us anymore. It's about the baby. Jacob looked at her, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. He had spent so long trying to move on from her, from his family, from the pain they had caused him. But now, faced with the reality of becoming a father, he couldn't just walk away. This wasn't just about him anymore. All right, he said after a long pause. We'll figure this out. But I need time, Emily. This is a lot. She nodded, relief washing over her face. I understand. Take all the time you need. But please, Jacob, don't shut me out. We're in this together, whether we like it or not. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Jacob threw himself into his work, using the busyness of his cafes as a distraction. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about the baby. He found himself imagining what it would be like to hold his child, to be a father. It was terrifying but also exciting. A week later, Jacob reached out to Emily. They met at a quiet cafe, far from the prying eyes of his employees and customers. The conversation was awkward at first, both of them tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. But as they talked, Jacob began to see a side of Emily he hadn't seen in years. She was vulnerable, honest, and determined to do right by their child. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Jacob said finally, and I want to be involved. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I want to be there for the baby. For both of you. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Thank you, Jacob. That means more to me than you know. As they left the cafe that day, Jacob felt a strange sense of peace. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Over the next few months, Jacob and Emily navigated their new reality together. They attended doctor's appointments, discussed names, and even started setting up a nursery. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension and doubt, but they both worked hard to put their child first. Jacob's parents, however, were another story. When they found out about the baby, they tried to insert themselves into Jacob's life once again. But this time, Jacob was ready. He set clear boundaries, refusing to let them manipulate him or Emily. This is about the baby, he told them firmly. If you want to be a part of their life, you need to respect my decisions. No more games. To his surprise, they listened. Slowly, cautiously, they began to rebuild their relationship with Jacob. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy baby girl named Lily, Jacob felt a love he had never known before. Holding her in his arms, he realized that all the pain and struggle had led him to this moment. He had built a life he could be proud of, and now he had the chance to give his daughter the love and support he had always longed for. As he looked at Emily, exhausted but smiling, he felt a sense of gratitude. They had been through so much, but they had found their way back to each other in the most unexpected way. And as he held his daughter close, Jacob knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future.